My name is Linda Matthews and I work for the Mining Competencies and Authorisations Unit. Joining me today as well will be Alex Warren, who is the interim convener for the Undermanagers panel, and we will also be introducing the new convener, James Pallas, as well. The Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development acknowledges that it stands on country which always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and waters, and we show our respect to elders past, present and emerging. We are committed to providing places in which Aboriginal people are included socially, culturally and economically through thoughtful and collaborative approach to our work. The briefing session will be recorded. So as previously mentioned, please keep your camera and microphone off during this time. Participants can use the chat to ask questions or give feedback. Remember, this is an open forum, so please be respectful and use appropriate language. Simply click on the chat icon of the menu and type in your message. This session will be recorded. The Q&A section of this will not be recorded. Chat questions will be read out during Q&A. And if you have any questions throughout the Q&A section, please raise your hand, turn your microphone on and go ahead. So the purpose of the briefing session, we'll be going through how to complete the online application form, what your portfolio and prereq requirements are, understanding the competency framework, what to expect during the written and oral examinations, your overall knowledge requirements, examination techniques, what type of questions you'll be asked, and the question assessment criteria and how to structure your approach when answering questions during the oral examination. As mentioned, Alex Warren is currently the interim convener. The panel members are Ben Patton and Justa Peterkin. As of 2025, James Pallas will be taking over as convener and Alex Warren will be stepping down into a panel member position. Reserve examiners are also appointed to assist the panel at any time. In relation to the application process, please make sure that you are informed and prepared. Make sure that you read the guides and the prerequisites required for the STAT function to assist you when applying. Throughout this presentation, anything that's highlighted blue and underlined may have a hyperlink in it. So when you receive the PowerPoint presentation, you can follow those hyperlinks. Please read through the generic guide. There's also an additional guide for the Undermanager of underground coal mines. Please make sure that you review the best practice guides and resources in relation to the examination rules so that you have a better understanding of how to prepare yourself. You need to make sure that you meet all the criteria and the practical experience set in the guides before you apply. And make sure that you get all your identification, qualification and transcript certificates certified. If you haven't already, please ensure that you request access to the Resources Regulated Mining Workers portal. It can take up to 3 business days for this to be processed, and you will need to provide certified identification to have this access granted. Ensure that you're familiar with the application dates and exam dates, which are available on the calendar. The application date for the written exam is on the 11th of February 2025. And if you haven't already, please ensure that you subscribe to the Mine Safety newsletter, as you will receive notifications throughout the year of any important changes. So here's some important dates for you, which is also available on the website as mentioned. The application closing date is the 11th of February. The written exam is scheduled for the 9th of April. The oral exam closing date is the 29th of May, with the first oral exam set for the 29th of July. The post-oral exam closing date is the 11th of December, with the second post-oral exam scheduled for the 3rd of February 2026. Statutory function guides are provided for each of the statutory functions to help people apply for examinations to obtain the Certificate of Competence and Practicing Certificates. All applications must include supporting documentation as evidence to satisfy each of the following prerequisites: that they have the qualification outlined in the guide. They also have the Emergency Preparedness Unit of Competency. You have your 6-part portfolio of evidence, and that you demonstrate the relevant practical experience required. This practical experience must be verified and signed off by the supervising manager who held the stated practicing certificate at the time of your employment. If you don't hold any of the qualifications or units of competence that are specified within this prerequisite fact sheet, please read the additional fact sheet, which will assist you in obtaining what you may need. And there's also an additional guide for you to refer to for further details. In relation to the portfolio of evidence, you must attach the following documents in your application as evidence of your competence, which must be relevant to the function. Your name must be on each of those documents of evidence that you were involved in. If not, then you can attach a signed document or a letter or an email from your supervisor or manager stating and confirming your involvement in those particular items. You may attach multiple documents to provide sufficient evidence using the add attachments at the bottom of the application form. Ensure you, when you do that, ensure that you have specified what particular item it's going to be saved for to make it easier for the administration team when they're going through your application. Portfolio 1 is a risk assessment, so you need to provide a copy of the WHO risk assessment that you were involved in. Portfolio 2 is your workplace inspection. You need to provide a copy of a workplace inspection, task observation or an audit that you carried out and documented at the mine. Portfolio 3 is the review of a principal hazard management plan or control plan. So this particular report needs to show your involvement in completing the PHMP or the control plan at your mine. Please do not provide the risk assessment associated with the PHMP or control plan. It needs to be the exact document. Portfolio 4 is the shift handover report, shift work plan or compliance report. So you need to provide a copy of either one of those reports that you had completed in the last 6 months. Okay, please ensure that these handover reports have your name and role stated on them. Portfolio 5 is the delivery of a workplace training program. You need to provide evidence of this training program that you were involved in developing and delivering for workers in full or in part. So this can be a toolbox talk or a shift or work group briefing. Please ensure that your name is on the PowerPoint presentation stating that you developed it, and you need to provide evidence that you delivered it as well, which is like could be a sign-in sheet or an attendance sheet. Alternatively, if you don't have any of that documentation, but you may have the PowerPoint presentation or just the attendance sheet, you can arrange to have your supervisor that was in attendance submit a letter to state that they were there and they can confirm and verify that you developed and delivered the session. Portfolio 6 is your safe work procedure or related document for standard settings. So you need to provide us with a copy of a workplace procedural that you had actioned at your mine. For more information, please make sure that you read the guide on the website. It'll provide you a breakdown of what some additional items you could provide. When it comes to your application process, you will log on to the Resources Regulator portal, move through to the Mining Workers portal section, click on the Certificate of Competence and click on Apply for a Certificate of Competence. You will need to complete the application. There is a sample practical experience section that you could have a look at to assist you, to complete that practical experience section. All columns must be completed or you risk your application being rejected. Your experience must be verified and signed off by a supervisor who holds the Undermanager of Underground Coal Mines Practicing Certificate. Your application can be also saved as a draft in the portal, so you don't need to complete it all at the one time. You can, up in the right top hand corner, you will hit drafts. When you come and log back into the portal, you can go up into the draft section and then you can re-download your application and continue from it there. Once you have submitted your application form, if you've chosen to do so, I would highly recommend doing it, is to register to sit for the upcoming exam. You just need to select the exam that you want to sit and the date. No late registrations will be accepted, so ensure that you submit your application before the closing date. Now, for anyone that has sat previously and hasn't been successful, as of 1 July 2024, if a candidate has been unsuccessful in any 2 Certificate of Competence exam round attempts, They must submit a plan form explaining how they will prepare for passing future exam attempts. This form will be submitted as part of your application to resit the next round of exams to the Resources Regulator for approval. When completing your application, we strongly recommend that you register to sit. So you can just follow the bits and pieces throughout the actual mining workers portal. If you do have any issues with registering to sit, please contact the mining competency team immediately and we'll assist you. When you go onto the register to sit form, it will look very similar to this. You need to, some sections of it will be pre-populated. Ensure that you select the correct certification, which exam you're planning on sitting. If it's a new application, you will select no for previously applied question. And if this is your second or further along one, you will select yes for the previously applied question and pay the applicable fee. So what happens next? Your application is then will be reviewed. If it's inadequate or if anything needs to be resubmitted, you'll be communicated to via email. Once your application is checked for completeness, documents, portfolio, practical experience is verified, your application will be then sent to for endorsement by the convener. Once the convener has endorsed your application for experience, it will then be sent to the mining competency manager for approval. Once your application has been approved, your exam status will change from expression of interest to waitlist, and you'll be able to see this within the mining workers portal. You'll be invited to sit the exam via email closer to the exam date. So what does your exam invitation look like? So within your invitation, it will have the details of the exam you are sitting and the certification, how to pay the applicable sitting fee, the location, date and time of your exam. Any important information that you may need to know will be noted in the attendance comments. You must accept or decline your invitation, otherwise our system will regard you as not attending. You will need to log into the mining workers portal before clicking on the accept or decline link within the body of the email invitation. If you can no longer attend, you must withdraw your invitation via the mining workers portal or inform the mining competency team. If you're sitting multiple written exams, you'll receive a separate email invitation for each exam. Make sure that you keep your contact details and your workplace up to date via the mining workers portal. And any changes to your email address, you must email the mining competency team directly, as majority of the time, your username for your mining workers portal is the email address that you have given us. If you need any help, please refer to the website. The website has got all the guides, information, and knowledge material that you need to help you and assist you throughout this process. You can email our team. You can also give us a call, and make sure that you're referring back to the mining workers portal to check for updates, progress, emails, and your results. When it comes to the examination process, so competencies are set out in the framework are focused on ensuring the health and safety of mine workers. They are separate from corporate knowledge and skills that mining companies and other employers of mine workers may see as important drivers of the mine productivity and management. The framework provides a basis for the consistent and reliable assessment of the competence of people applying for a certificate of competence in a statutory function. Certificates of competence are required for 14 practicing certificate for statutory functions in New South Wales mines. Statutory function requiring practicing certificates are listed by class of mine. The competencies within the framework are arranged in domains, focus areas, and levels. We'll move on to domains. So domains related sets of foundational knowledge, understanding, and abilities. This framework has 4 domains. These relate to the following. Domain 1 is the statutory functions and regulatory requirements. Domain 2 is the application and implementation of hazard management through technical knowledge. Domain 3 is your situational awareness and risk management. And Domain 4 is the supervising in the workplace. Focus areas identify specific areas of knowledge, understanding skill or skills application within each domain. The focus area within each domain are set out in tables. When you refer to this document on the website, as shown here in this slide, there are each of these tables and focus areas you'll be able to refer to. Please read through these, please understand them, as they will be able to assist you throughout this examination round. The framework requirements, there's 3 statutory function levels. The levels, they differentiate by the technical or the specialised nature of the roles and the extent of their responsibilities within and across mining operations. As you can see, the Undermanager is a level 2. So you're in between the bottom lower level and also the level 3. When it comes to the competency framework, the competencies are they set out the knowledge, understanding, and the skills to be demonstrated by the candidates addressing the focus areas at each level. The competencies are numbered according to their domain, focus area, and level. So for example, for competency 1.3.2, this refers to the competency relevant to domain 1, focus area 3, level 2. Make sure that you're familiar with the framework to understand the scope of what can be assessed and prepare you for your examinations. Blueprinting for certificate of competence examinations. So the examiners map questions and marking criteria to assess competencies. Competencies may be assessed in multiple questions for different aspects of them. Each competency is assessed at least every 3 years or more often. Certain competencies are covered in either both written and oral examinations depending on their nature. If you have to sit a post-oral exam after your first, you will be reassessed on all competencies each time, regardless of whether you have satisfied the competency previously. For further information, please refer to the guide. And if you go through the FAQs on assessment blueprinting, it will probably answer the majority of the questions that you may have. Changes to the examination process for new candidates. So a new candidate is an individual who has either submitted an application or started the examination process after 1 July 2022. The written exam, candidates will require to pass the written exams to be eligible to progress to sit the oral exam. If you fail the written exams, the applications will be closed and you'll be required to submit a new application to sit the next round. As the Undermanager statutory function has more than one written exam, you require to pass all written exams to move to the next stage. If you pass one and fail the other, your application will be closed and you'll need to submit a new application the next round and commence the process again. When it comes to an oral examination for new candidates, candidates will be eligible to sit 2 oral exam attempts within the exam round. Should a candidate not sit one or both of the oral exams within that round, that attempt will be forfeited. You cannot defer your attempt unless you provide evidence of extenuating circumstances. So when it comes to the attempt 1 of the oral examination, if you're assessed as competent, you will be recommended to be granted a certificate of competence. But if you're assessed as not yet competent for your first oral exam attempt, you will be eligible to sit a second one within that exam round. Attempt number 2 or a post-oral exam. If you're assessed as competent for your second oral exam attempt, you will be recommended to be granted a certificate of competence. If you're assessed as not yet competent at your second or post-oral exam attempt, the application will be closed and you'll be required to submit a new application, recommence the process at the next examination round. Changes to the examination process for existing candidates. So an existing candidate is an individual who has submitted their application or started the examination process before 1 July 2022. For the written exam, candidates will require to pass the written exam to be eligible to progress to sit the oral exam. If you fail the written exam, you will only sit the exams that you failed in the next exam round. You will need to register to sit via the Mining Workers Portal and pay the application fee again. And candidates will only have 3 attempts to sit in the written exam within 3 years from submitting your application and being approved. In relation to oral exam, the candidate will be eligible to sit 3 oral exam attempts within 3 years of passing the written exam. If you're assessed as not yet competent for your third and final, or if you don't sit all 3 oral exam attempts within the 3 years, the application will be closed and you'll be required to submit a new application and recommence the process under whatever the rules are at that time. I will
Alrighty.
now pass over to Alex.
Thanks, Linda. Good morning, everyone. I modified this slide from last year, so if anyone attended last year, there'll be a lot of similarities here. But I'll just make a comment that top line is incorrect. There's no changes this year to what we had last year, but for context, prior to 2024, anyone who's been around would have known that there was 3 individual papers being a legislation paper, ventilation, and mining practice. Last year was the first time we've done it, and we'll continue that into next year. That's been reduced down to 2 individual exams, being ventilation by itself and mining practice by itself. So essentially the removal of the legislation paper. And mining practice in years gone by, we used to do 8 multiple choice questions where you could select 5, and we've condensed that down to be 5 mandatory attempted questions. So if anyone's unsure as to why we've gone down that path, the legislation elements being assessed by the panel can be done in the other 2 papers, so in the ventilation and practices. And an example, there's always going to be a notifiable incident in a mining practice question or some sort of investigation requirements, and embedded throughout that whole process as legislation elements. So we can assess technical knowledge and practical knowledge as well as your legislation understanding. And that second dot point, if we're talking about hazardous zones, they're legislated, minimum air quantities are legislated. If there's questions around, as an undermanager, what considerations do you need to have, on a longwall move? There are legislation elements to that. How are you going to manage the volume of diesels in there? What supervision arrangements are required? And how that process is going to be managed and recorded. So rather than having in a legislation paper having a question that says what are the diesel requirements for a longwall move, we'd rather put that into more practical terms, and it gets away from the verbatim legislation knowledge and gives the candidate an opportunity to apply that knowledge in a more practical way. So I think it's a step forward from the panel. And the dot point's always a given. If you're hoping there's not a question about X, you've got a few months between now and the written, which is some time now. So it's one of those things that we don't look to pull a rabbit out of a hat or identify some obscure type of mining method or something that's a really unique niche element of our industry to examine on. So, but there are some pretty obvious things that happen around the industry. There's been some mines that have introduced variable mining methods over the last sort of say 5 years or so. 15 of 17 mines are longwall mines. So if anyone in the room is at one of the non-longwall operations, I might have their numbers wrong, but majority of the industry is longwall based. So if anyone's not familiar with how longwall works and how it's ventilated and what challenges there are, with gas management and the like, basically that dot point suggests you've got a few months to roll your sleeves up on that. Next slide, please, Linda. So in the vent paper, there's been several rumours around it, so I'll just put them to bed now that it'll remain a 2-hour exam. We understand that it's a stressful time, and if you had another half an hour or an extra an hour to address the exam, it'll be a more convenient thing as a candidate, but it'll remain a 2-hour exam because the intent of it is to put you in an exam scenario. It's not a assignment type exam where you've got all afternoon to sort of consider all of the variables. We do look at writing the questions that are geared towards what an undermanager should know at this point in their journey, fully appreciating that in 10 years down the track, you're going to have a deeper understanding of mine ventilation, but there is a minimum threshold of what's expected to know for where people are when they approach the written exam. So that's the benchmark that we operate to. So the paper will be in a similar format to previous exam years. It will incorporate elements of ventilating various aspects of a mine plan, as well as some hazard management and proposed controls on how various things are going to be addressed. And I can't stress enough that it needs to be relevant to the mine plan. We have seen countless times over the years, it might be a mine plan that's high propensity to spontaneous combustion, and people we'll tend to sort of put a pre-scripted number of hazards and controls on the paper, which of course there's going to be some relevance to those couple of items. But as examiners, we're really looking at, are you focusing on the big issues relevant to this plan as opposed to a generic 10-step hazard? Like, I mean, every mine's going to have airborne dust hazards. Every mine's going to have ventilation quantity hazards. Every mine's going to have frictional ignition risk if it's a gassy mine and they're not cutting a full seam of coal. So to just sort of put them down as a verbatim, you're really going to burn a lot of time with a pre-scripted answer. I'd really encourage people to, in that 10-minute reading time, really identify what are the key issues that are going to jump out in this paper, and then how are you going to address those in your overall hazard management. So that's just something to consider moving forward. But when we're looking at your technical and practical knowledge, these few dot points here, have you ever ventilated a mine plan? And are you familiar with writing on a large mine plan? Because it can be quite daunting if the first time you've ever opened up a full mine plan on the exam day, if you've never actually practiced on a paper that size. So it's good to get an idea what it's going to feel like on the actual day. So I'm sure any tech services department at whatever mine you work at will be happy to print out a few plans for you to practice on over a weekend. Have you considered what stationary items you need on the day? Obviously, calculator, ruler, pens and pencils. In the exam guidelines, there are rules around what you can bring and what you can't bring. So obviously, like smartphones and laptops and the obvious things you can't bring in. So just familiarise yourself with what you're allowed to bring into the exam and make sure you've got as many tools that can assist you on the day. And another one here, which has gotten a lot better over the years, but are you familiar with recording a legend on the mine plan? Because the ventilation exam is around your understanding of current mining practices and relevant standards within the industry. We've seen people over the years make up their own symbols for mine plan legends, which I think in a one-on-one conversation, you'd be able to demonstrate why you've gone that certain route, but it is, you are being assessed on your understanding of the standards applied across the industry. So I would steer away from creating your own symbols for various parts of the mine plan. There will be calculations on the day, including gas makes. So be familiar with how you convert quantities to litres per second or litres per minute, whatever the relevant gas may be. So again, don't leave yourself to the last minute to start getting your head around that. You've got a good few months to runway to get into that. And you're reminded to present your exam in a legible, logical format. I've marked the vent paper over the years, and some people may answer elements of a question across several questions, and it's difficult as an examiner to join all the dots to understand for the candidate to demonstrate how they've effectively applied their knowledge to that part of the question. So I think the best advice I'd give there is question A, pick a part of the plan that you're going to address that part and put a box around it. Question B, do the same, put a box around it. If you just sort of scatter numbers and calculations with arrows all over the page, it's going to get quite messy to sort of follow your thought process. So just be mindful of the advice there is really the best preparation you can do is practice. So if you do a few plans in advance, you'll get an idea what it's like to record on the page and how much space a certain answer should take. So just something to be familiar with. And can't support this enough that assumptions need to be clearly stated. So I'd steer away from, if you get a question with 10 cubes in situ gas content, some people will just write at the very top of the paper, assume 50% effective gas drainage. And the real question would be is how have you arrived to that assumption? And depending on, there's a number of variables that can contribute to the efficiency of a gas drainage network. So if you're going to come out with a blanket statement, there should be some additional dot points to support how you got to that. But a more logical approach would be identifying the issues that are going to cause restrictions or challenges to any ventilation control you're going to implement, and therefore a realistic assumption might be the outcome. So if it's 600 or 700 meters deep, predominantly CO2, and you're restricted to a 2,000 litre capacity gas drainage plant, then assuming a 70% efficiency rate is pretty unrealistic. So just be mindful how you structure those you structure that approach, because as an examiner reading this paper 2, 3, 4 weeks later, we don't have the luxury of sitting down with you as a candidate to say, what did you mean by this? So whatever you're writing, you need to keep in mind that someone else is going to read this a few weeks later and have you made it in a logical thought process so we can demonstrate where you're going and how you're getting there. All right, next one, please, Linda. In the mining practice, that'll still remain a 3-hour exam, and the paper will be in a similar format, which can cover a range of items, whether it be short, long questions, multiple choice, potentially drawings, if maybe sequencing of an area, or drawings to support. A question may ask you to draw something to describe how you would address a certain issue. So just be mindful that you can be assessed on in a number of ways. That's not all just going to be 1 or 2 sentence type answers. So just be mindful of, in your preparation, get used to writing a page for an answer instead of just a couple of dot points. So, and you're reminded that the process for developing our questions is something I've alluded to on the earlier slides, but what's the minimum knowledge required to be deemed competent? So if we're asking a question around SPONCOM or shot firing, or introducing a longwall or whatever it may be, the question's designed to assess you at the minimum requirement for an undermanager. Now, we've all worked in the industry for decades, or probably centuries combined, and there's some undermanagers that are good, solid citizens that know what they need to know, and then there's other undermanagers that might be, really technical and really in the detail and can recite all sorts of things that as candidates we would think, wow, like he's a super type undermanager. But that's not the level of questions that we're asking for. We really just want to set that minimum benchmark for anyone who gets a certificate of competence to be an undermanager has met that minimum threshold. So being a level 2 competency, there's not going to be questions regarding a deputy level knowledge. So in a ventilation calculation, we're not going to ask, you've got 10 parts CO with 50 cubes content, what's the CO make? Because it's very entry level numbers. It's very entry level technical knowledge that we're assessing, which is obviously more relevant to a deputy level. So if we're going to do a CO make calculation or a methane calculation, there may be a decimal place, or there may be an odd number, or whatever it is, because it's your way to demonstrate that you can adapt and be more fluid with those variable situations. Not everything's going to be perfect round numbers. Not everything's going to be a perfect clear-cut scenario. And yeah, so that's really looking at how you factor in the data that we've given you, and then how you've assessed it, how you've problem solved it, and then how you've come up with a logical scenario on the other side. Because as we can all relate, there's not a day an undermanager doesn't get something come across their desk that they've really got to sit back and think, okay, how are we going to address this? What information do I know so far? What information do I need? How do I factor that into my decision-making process? And then who do I consult with? And then how do I get this show on the road for a safe and effective outcome? So all of the questions that we're doing is in that similar headspace. What the questions aren't going to be too easy, but equally so, they're not going to be a mine manager level where you're going to be asked for the intricacies of developing an in-rush management plan or something like that. And that bottom one there, as an exam panel, we've all got undermanager qualifications. We've all worked in the role, so we understand what we believe is a reasonable limit as that threshold. So we determine what the pass-fail criteria is. So over the years, candidates have agreed or disagreed with that, but if those individuals ever become examiners, they will appreciate the fact that we need to apply that consistent, logical approach across the whole state for various candidates coming from different districts. So there may be some things that a candidate from the Wollongong district may be given for the type of mining they do or the expected knowledge there, but it could be quite a step change for someone from a different district. So some questions may lean towards someone's experience and other questions may lean towards someone else's history. So we do just take that broad, generalised approach on this is what, as examiners, we're comfortable to say if we can tick all these boxes, this candidate has demonstrated the minimum requirements to perform the statutory function as an undermanager. It's not about there's no high distinction and there's no credit mark like from a university perspective. It's just about do you meet the minimum threshold, and if so, we'll shake your hand and on your way. All right, Linda, next one, thanks. With the orals, which we did do the second round of orals only in the last couple of weeks. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with it, most people have probably got a deputy's ticket or even been through the Undermanager process themselves. The panel will consist of up to 3 examiners. We can conduct the exam with 2 examiners, but we do always aim for 3, but that can obviously be variable on people's availability and whatnot. The duration can be up to an hour, which we can add a few minutes on if we need to, depending how long the introductions and license checks and all that sort of stuff can go. So that's sort of 1 hour is an indication of how long you're going to be in the room. And something we've introduced in the last 12 months, we spell this out quite clearly in the start of our exams now, whereas in the past, it was more of a given that candidates would understand that, but now we're a lot more upfront with that to say you could be in here for up to an hour and there's opportunity to ask clarifying questions. We understand you're nervous. Again, we've all been there and we're not trying to catch you out. So having recently done the deputies and undermanagers oral exams in the last few weeks, we make it very clear to the candidates that you have an opportunity to ask for clarification in the question, or if an examiner doesn't quite understand what you're trying to describe, we may be able to ask it from a different way, or sometimes if a different examiner may ask a similar question to try and get some momentum in the question. They're tools that we can use as an exam panel to sort of help the flow of the question. So as a candidate, don't feel like you can't write things down in the exam room, or you can't, if the question's a long-winded one, scribble some notes down and by all means say to the examiners, you mentioned A, B, and C, can you just clarify the second half of the question? Because that also demonstrates to the exam panel that if you're unsure about something, you're actually going to stop and ask the question, because in the actual role in industry, you're going to get hundreds of data inputs coming across your desk, and you need to be able to be mature and professional enough that if something doesn't sound right or it isn't right or you can't verify it yourself, you need to stop and say, I need to get more information on this before I assume and rely on that information to go into my plan. And an example would be in a situation in an oral exam, if there's gas management involved, it's dare I say disappointing for the amount of people we've seen over the years that will talk about degassing a longwall panel or a gate road panel with a high volume of gas on the assumption that there's no diesels or there's no electric powered equipment or there's no people in a return roadway. People will say, I'll monitor the gas output at 1% or 1.5%. We'll say, as an examiner, you say, why 1%? And they'll say, I don't want to send a plug through. And we'd say, well, what's the risk of sending a plug through? And they'll say, it could affect people, or you lose control if you're sending a plug through and all that sort of stuff. But we're kind of drawing that out of the candidate, which a much stronger position as a candidate would be, prior to introducing any gas into this roadway in a controlled way, I need to verify that there's no people in there. I need to verify any electrical equipment is isolated. I need to verify that there's no machines operating in there. And once I've satisfied myself that that can be confirmed and validated, then I'll progress to the next stage of this question. So don't make assumptions that on a pre-shift scenario, for example, that no one's in the return, because it's just one of those things that as a candidate, you need to demonstrate to the exam panel of how you've considered the hazards involved with the process that you're about to apply. So don't assume that everything is just going to fall into place like a normal day at the pit. So you need to factor that in. We will be taking some notes. So we say to everyone, we're not trying to be rude if we're looking down, scribbling some notes down. And we may ask follow-up questions. I kind of alluded to this before, that if we can see that you're trying to describe something, or you might not be structuring your answer as well as we can see, we may prompt you to say, why don't you stop, go back to the start of the question, tell us what you've done so far. We might ask it in a different way to sort of say, when you were talking about this part of the answer, what did you mean by that? We encourage people to take their time and structure their answer before giving an answer that sort of alludes to that assumptions. Like, so don't assume that it's going to be a benefit if you quickly respond to the question. It's quite a benefit if you actually, digest the scenario for 5 or 10 seconds and collect yourself and identify where your big hitters are on where you need to focus initially. So there's no bonus points for jumping in too quick. And there's a minimum amount of content we need to get through to be deemed competent. So, but that's this second last dot point is a pretty important one for anyone who's unfamiliar with how the exams work. It is not true that if you run the clock down by going over excessive detail on benchmarking or writing down questions for that excessive amount of time that somehow going to be benefited. And examples I'll give, I heard it myself going through the process over the years, and I've heard it countless times over a 15-year period that people will say, the more you talk as a candidate, the less time the examiner's got time to ask you a question. So burn the clock as much as you can, which leaves a narrow window for the examiners to actually ask you questions. So my response to that would be, as examiners, we have a minimum amount of questions and assessments to get through to form the opinion that you're going to be deemed competent. And if you're burning time with asking really low-level, over-the-top questions, and what I mean by that, there's nothing wrong with asking questions relevant to the scenario, but we've had candidates in the past where we'll say, you're on a production shift, you've got a longwall and 3 development panels, and we've had candidates burn time asking about, okay, in the development panel, how far is the miner up A heading? How many guys are in the crew? What's the planned production shift? Production rates for it, when's the next belt move planned? Like all of these just really low level time wasting questions when really there's no benefit to that. And really, if you're going to burn 5 minutes just writing down, the miners at 25 cut through, 6 meters in by A heading and all this sort of stuff, like it's really insignificant data points to the scenario. If the examiners feel that it's relevant, we will say the miner's halfway up A heading and you're planning a belt move tomorrow. If it's of relevance to the scenario, we'll introduce that to save time on that tic-tac to get information relevant to the scenario. And as examiners, we're not going to withhold key information to the scenario and wait for you to draw it out from us, because we're going to give you the scenario with the relevant information, and then it's up to you as the candidate to say, okay, with everything you've given me, this is how I'm going to address that situation. So the key thing out of that is just don't waste your time or the examiner's time just going around in circles on essentially insignificant stuff. If it's relevant, we'll make it relevant. And if we find you're sort of burning time and just going sort of running into a brick wall, we'll just like draw a line. We'll just say, okay, you've got all the information you need. What are you going to do about it? And that bottom point sort of feeds into that if we don't get through our minimum requirements to make that informed decision to deem you competent, then by default, you'll be deemed not yet competent. Even if you've done a great job on the first 1 or 2 questions, if your strategy going into the exam is burn a lot of time for no value, unfortunately, you're not going to get the outcome that you want. Alrighty, next one. Thanks, Linda. All right,
so back much, over Alex. Linda. All right, so we're going to go into the results now. So candidates will be notified of exam results within a maximum of 6 weeks of the examination date, but we'll work to issue these to you sooner. But please know that it could be up to 6 weeks from the examination date to receive your results. In relation to the written exam, you'll be advised of the examination outcome for each exam paper via email. Copies of each examination paper will be published onto the website so candidates can compare their results to it and the general comments provided. If a candidate is within 5 marks of the pass mark, your paper will be reviewed by a member of the examination panel who was not involved in the original marking to confirm the marks awarded are correct. General comments by the examination panel may be provided for each examination panel paper, and general comments summarise the overall performance of all candidates. They are not specific to an individual candidate. In relation to the oral exam, you'll be advised of the examination outcome via email as well. An examiner's report will be published at the conclusion of an exam round. Please refer to the website for current examiner reports. In relation to feedback, this is for oral exams only. Feedback can be requested by replying to the examination outcome email. Alternatively, you can contact us via email or call the 1300 number. A suitable time will be organised when a mining competency member can contact you and provide the verbal feedback to you over the phone. Be prepared to note down the feedback comments. Electronic copies of the examination panel feedback comments are not provided. If you attempt to contact the examiners directly, you will be referred back to the mining competency team. A request for additional feedback will be considered by the examination panel, although this may be declined. In relation to formal reviews, after receiving your feedback or being advised that the request was declined, candidates may request a formal review if they have justification that the assessment outcome was deficient or in error. When you're requesting a formal review, you need to contact the mining competency team on the 1300 number to discuss why you believe the assessment outcome was deficient or in error. You will be then requested to submit the review of an examination outcome form via the Mining Workers portal, and that needs to be submitted within 5 business days of receiving your feedback or being advised that the request was declined. You need to provide a detailed justification as to why you believe the assessment outcome was deficient or in error. If the justification isn't sufficient to base a review upon if it was, you will then receive the payment link. Once your payment is received, the review will be conducted within 1 month of the receipt of the request, and candidates will be notified in writing of their outcome of the review. Now, if, as you can see throughout this, I said the words, the outcome was deficient or in error. If you don't have the detailed justification to state why you believe your assessment outcome was deficient or in error, you won't be able to submit the review of an examination outcome form, okay? This is very important. You need to have detailed information why you believe that this is incorrect and you believe that you should be entitled to a formal review. So if you've attended this session, you'll receive a copy of the presentation. The briefing session has been recorded. The Q&A session will not be recorded. The recording will be published on the website within the next few weeks, but we can't guarantee the quality of these recordings. I thank you very much for your time today. Please stay online for the Q&A. I'll be stopping the recording now.